Hello economists, this is Miss Haley and welcome back to AP Macro Flip videos. So today we're going to talk about the shortcomings of fiscal policy and see when sometimes expansionary fiscal policy actually doesn't have its intended results. So let's first do a quick review of what are different types of fiscal policy. So we might remember we have expansionary policy, so this idea of the government trying to get their nation out of a recessionary gap, and then the opposite of contractionary policy, when the government is seeing this high-level inflation, this inflationary gap, and they're trying to counteract that as well. And so again, the goals of either contractionary fiscal policy or expansionary fiscal policy are these attempts to smooth out the business cycle. So instead of this invisible hand leading nations to very extreme booms or extreme busts, that this expansionary policy or contractionary policy can smooth out those bumps of the business cycle and leading the nation towards a more smooth increase of economic growth with real GDP increases over time. But humans are not always easy to predict, and there are three flaws that economists have predicted of fiscal policy where the intended increase of aggregate demand actually isn't always gained to its full effect or on the time schedule that we would like. So let's first look at this idea of time lags. So the main idea of recognizing time lags of fiscal policy is this idea that instead of government spending immediately increasing or immediately occurring during a country's recessionary period, the effects of expansionary fiscal policy can actually be delayed in three parts of the process. So there could be a delay in that beginning recognition of a depression or a recession. And so if it takes more time for the economists to realize, oh, we're actually in a recession, we should increase government spending, there might be deeper into a recession than intended. There's also the second type of lag, this implementation administration lag, this idea that actually passing legislation and getting the fiscal policy approved takes more time than would want to be intended by the government. And then this third type of lag is impact and operational lag. Even when fiscal policy is realized that it is needed and is passed, the actual process of the multiplier effect is not immediate, that it takes time as well. So of the different lags, the most of interest to me as a historian is this recognition lag, that we as historians and economists recognize that 2007 was the beginning of the Great Recession, and we see that's when the housing market crumbled, collapsed, and led to the Great Recession that we see today. Back in 2008, so a whole year after the housing market collapsed, we still have economists saying, I don't think we are in a recession, we are not forecasting a recession. And so it takes this longer amount of time for economists in the moment to realize when they're in a recession. And so why is that? That's because the data that we use to measure a recession, so GDP, whether it's decreasing, unemployment, if it's rising, that data isn't always at our fingertips as a country. That GDP data is issued quarterly, so four times in a year, and then unemployment as well sometimes isn't as immediate. And so we could have, as a nation, this recognition lag that we as a nation don't realize that we're in a recession and would need this type of expansionary fiscal policy. The second type of lag, right, is this idea that even when a nation realizes it's in a recession, it might take time to approve legislation. If the country's using a democratic process, they need to develop that fiscal policy. It has to move through whatever kind of legislative body that they have and actually get approval by their government or their leader. So even when a government and a nation realizes, oh shoot, we're in a recession, we really need to solve this, maybe we want to implement expansionary fiscal policy, it needs to pass through multiple hands and be voted on by multiple groups. And then when that voting process finishes, there's still a time lag between when it's passed and when it can have its full ripple effect through the economy. So although we recognize that the multiplier effect is very powerful, that it can lead to an increased amount of spending within a society, even when businesses get that money, they're going to spend it or spend part of it based on their marginal propensity to consume. That doesn't happen immediately. It's not like all businesses hop online and buy every single item they want. So online spending and online shopping does increase the process, but there still is this time lag between when business spend the money. That money now is spent by the individual and then back to businesses. So even though the multiplier effect and the circular flow of spending is powerful, it takes some time. The second flaw of fiscal policy is this idea of crowding out. So this idea that even when the government is spending more money, that we have an increase in government spending, there might not be as large of an increase in aggregate demand because that government spending is crowding out or replacing the spending that we might see by consumers and by businesses that becomes investment spending. So for an example, let's say that the Jordanian government wants to buy every single freshman a new computer, which would be pretty cool. So they're saying we want to stimulate the economy, we want to actually increase productivity, so we're going to give these computers to every single student. So that money is increased government spending, but it actually might be canceling out or replacing consumer spending because many of those families might have been already buying computers on their own through private businesses. Privately owned businesses, not government spending. And so that action of government spending is actually replacing consumer spending. So there would be an increase in AG, but not as great as predicted. There also might be a negative impact of government spending on investment spending. So if we remember with the loanable funds markets, the loans or the money used to buy something else is the good, and the price of those loans is interest rate. So if governments are going out, if the Jordanian government is trying to buy a computer for every single freshman in Jordan, they're going to definitely have to increase their government borrowing, that they're going to demand more loans. And so if the government shifts the demand of loanable funds market to the right, they are also raising the cost of those loans, that the interest rates would go from 5% to 6% in this example. And so if we have a higher interest rate, that is going to negatively impact the amount of loans that businesses are going to want to take out. And so businesses are saying, I don't want to take out as many loans. There's a really high interest rate. And so those businesses will be taking out less loans, having less investment. So there'll be less capital goods purchased by businesses. So that increase in government spending might actually decrease the investment of the nation, again, having a smaller impact on AD as intended. And so then the last flaw or shortcoming of fiscal policy is this idea of saving shifts. And so again, we know that the intent of expansionary fiscal policy is that increase in government spending will lead to increase in spending just overall in the economy, that there's going to be a higher amount of consumption, higher amount of businesses spending. But because people, right, aren't always have a linear kind of process of their decision making, this increase in government spending might actually lead people to increase their savings and put that new income away and save it for the future, because they might predict that in the future, right now we're in an expansionary phase or trying to expand the economy's GDP from the recessionary gap. They might see that in the future maybe we're going to have contractionary periods, that we're going to see actually higher tax in the future. And this fear of future taxes is going to lead the consumers to, instead of going through the multiplier effect and spending that more money and having the circular flow of money, they might actually stop that circular flow of money and save the money instead. And so if the increase in government spending actually is met with an equal increase in savings by businesses and or consumers, the fiscal policy is actually nullified and void and does not impact AD and does not try to close that recessionary gap. So even if they tried, it doesn't successfully close that recessionary gap. If instead of the government spending becoming more spending, it becomes savings. So thank you all for listening to today's video. Again, while many economists want expansionary policy to fix recessionary gaps, we as economists also want to understand and identify these three shortcomings of fiscal policy: time lags, crowding out, and saving shifts. And looking at these specific shortcomings of fiscal policy, we're going to begin to delve again into this debate essential question. So how should governments use fiscal policy to combat stagflation? Thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.